Good evening, everyone. I'm actually surprised because he didn't tell me I'll be here. I was actually going, and he asked me to come back. So my name is Lasbury Oludimo. I'm the Vice President Legal for Yellow Card Financial. Yellow Card is a US company, is an exchange, and we have a presence in Nigeria and in other 15 African countries. I think that's enough. So I'm the legal person there, and I'm in charge of product and commercials. I also double as the chief data protection officer.
Amazing, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Oinkare Harrison. I'm the head of legal compliance, OneLiquidity.
Thank you very much. And let's start with a straightforward question, and maybe I'll throw it to Lasbury first. 80% of cyber crimes, financial crimes, happen in Europe, America, and Asia. But all African countries are red listed or blacklisted with FATSA. Why? Why are we the ones that are bearing the grunt of these illegal activities when the least of it is happening in Africa?
Okay, I think I will start by saying that Africa is a very big market, right? So when the last speaker was here, he made a comment about somebody when there is a hack and they'll come to Lagos to sell, right? So it's as if they all come here to offload whatever transaction it is. Because of the size of the market here, they all come here to offload. So you find out that those transactions that happen in Europe, America, and all those continents, they actually end up in Africa. So you could actually trace those transactions back to Africa. And another thing you also notice is the lack of regulation. In those foreign countries, they have better regulations than African countries. Take, for example, the crypto space. You can say that the crypto industry is, I can say, not regulated within the African continent, even though some African countries are trying to bring up regulations and all that, but is heavily unregulated. And because of that lack of regulation, nobody is actually looking at what the transaction, what is happening within the African continent. And you find out that those transactions will end up here and they will just liquidate those funds here. So when you're tracing it, you bring it back here. And if there is actually a hack, nobody will go to America because those environment are regulated. So they tend to come to an environment that is unregulated to kind of offload. And when you trace those transactions, they come back to us. And definitely, because we don't have regulations, those organizations would like to blacklist us because we don't have anybody regulating us. We don't have any regulation around within that space.
So is it a lack of regulation or a lack of enforcement of regulation? Because I feel like in Africa, we may even be over-regulated because there are some things that regulation are hindering, but those things don't technically make sense. So is it that the regulators don't understand what's happening, or the companies are not enforcing these regulations, or the processes of the regulation is flawed? What do you think is?
Okay, personally, I think the two. First, there has to be a regulation before enforcement. Mm-hmm. Okay, so one, I'll say the first problem is operating in an unregulated environment. That's the first one. Then in areas where we have regulations, there is currently no implementation. You just have an act, you just have a regulation, it's sitting around somewhere. Once you go to your law books, you see the regulation, but implementation is very poor. Yeah. Okay, so implementation is also a very big challenge when you come down to spaces like this. So one, I would say lack of regulation. Secondly, I would say implementation. We don't really, There was actually something I was searching for, and I found out there is actually an act. I've never had that act. All through my law school, I never heard about the act. But we have an act. Unfortunately, nobody's implementing it. So lack of regulation is one. Then where there is regulation, implementation is also a problem.
Amazing. Okay. And to carry to you, I know you worked in the Ministry of Justice. So what are the practical steps that every company needs to take to enforce regulations, and how are you forcing those behaviors?
Okay. Before I get to respond to you, let me add up to what Lasbury was trying to say with respect to regulation and enforcement. Now, when you asked the question, you made mention of FATF.
Yeah.
Now, the FATF has 40 recommendations for various countries, for countries around the world that sign up to them. And they expect that as a country, if you implement those regulations, there are expected outcomes. Now, what most African countries do is we do the copy and paste thing. Like you just go, okay, they said we should have this in place. They say we should have AYB in place. You go and have them. But in the long run, you find out that there are no outcomes. For instance, it is expected that there's supposed to be a law enforcement coordination in your country that ultimately ends up in courts with a verdict or judgment with respect to anti-money laundering cases. But you find out that in Nigeria, we hardly get those outcomes. And countries that do not have those outcomes at the end of the day are usually blacklisted by FATF. That's to add up to what she said. Now back to your question, Muna. There are regulations, but most times you find out that because we don't have institutions in place that make sure that those regulations are adhered to, you just find out that companies keep doing whatever it is they want. Now, when Dixon was speaking, he made mention of a compliance culture. It's one thing to have an AMN policy in place, and it's another to have an AML procedure that the company adheres to and follows. And like he rightly noted, it flows from the head. Whatever happens at the head trickles down to the bottom. So for companies to be on top of their game, I think the management should take these policies very seriously and try to inculcate a compliance culture in their system.
Amazing, amazing. So do you think, is it better to force to be over compliant, and okay, where do you guys draw the line between, because compliance is a cost, and it's a very expensive cost. How do you guys evaluate that cost in your business?
Could you take that again?
How do you know when, because obviously if it's a cost, you can overspend on it and you can underspend on it. Do you understand? By overspending means that you guys are checking everything, every single thing you need to do, and if the person does not have, even if he has A to Y, it does not have Z, you guys bounce it. So where should a company draw, like how should a company optimize for those processes?
Okay, the way I look at compliance, really, I see compliance as a standard, right? So there are things you need to do, or there are processes you need to put in place when it comes to compliance. So if you have those basic things in place, and no matter the cost, I won't take it as an overspending kind of, right? Because it starts with KYC, it starts with transaction monitoring, then it goes down. So if you have invested in getting, let's say, vendors on each of those standards, that's like the base, right? Then depending on the nature of your business or the nature of your transaction, if you want to go further to get additional vendors, I wouldn't say is also an overspending, because for me and compliance, you will never overspend on compliance. That's the way I look at it. Because if you're spending $1 million on compliance, you end up saving yourself more funds, more millions, right? Than when you just spend a few, and like I tell my people, you can actually do a transaction, like 20 transactions, and you have issues with 14, and 6 are okay. So my question is, why not do 8, and you know 6 is fine, you just have issues with 2? Why do you want to do about 20? Right? So if you don't have processes in place to ensure that the business team actually does 8 instead of 20, then it's a problem. And if you're spending your money to ensure that they actually do 8 instead of 20, you find out that you have saved cost, because you're going to spend additional cost trying to resolve whatever issues created by those 12 transactions. But if you're able to spend on your compliance team and make sure that at least the minimum, you have the standard, you save yourself a lot of cost. Okay. Then because I am in charge of products, the legal aspect of product and commercials too, I don't always to like stop their transactions. It's not the compliance is not there to reduce your transaction or stop your transaction, but there to guide you and direct you. You can't do this, you can't do this, and all that. So even when you're spending so much investing on your compliance policies, your compliance vendors, procedures, and all that, then you should also be a little bit flexible, but there should be a limit. There should be a base limit, right? If I need your KYC documents, I need your KYC documents. If they are not complete, you can't do business. You can't say, oh, let's do business today, I'll get it tomorrow. No, it has to be complete. That's the minimum we can take. Then any additional documents, we can always defer, get it later and all that, but there is always a minimum. So for you to do business, like I tell my people, for you to do that business, you have to get to that minimum, whatever it costs you. If you don't get to that minimum, that business will not take place.
Carrie, what's the minimum?
Well, like the name implies, KYC or KYB, know your customer, know your business. Now for me, for KYB, for the entity, I want to know the person behind the name. And that means I want to know the owner, and I would need to get his government-issued ID. I'll need to get his proof of address. I would need to know his other directors, the shareholders, the person with significant control of the company.
Why do we need, like, I'm a businessman, so compliance annoys me. And it's not in a bad way, but it's just like, I need to get this deal done. Do you understand? I need to bring money. So compliance now becomes like a hindrance to many business people. It's not a bad thing, again, but it is a hindrance because it's a cost. What is the intention for all this documentation? Why are we collecting it?
Okay. Basically, it's to combat money laundering, terrorist financing, and proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. That's the bottom line. Now, you find out that most money launderers look for ways to launder their funds. Launder their funds means washing these funds to make it look clean. For instance, let's say I've been a member of the House of Assembly in my state, and I have embezzled funds. Now I need to launder these funds. Obviously, I'm a PEP, and I know businesses would be very skeptical dealing with me. So the best thing for me would be to start up an entity and get to transact with OneLiquidity. But now OneLiquidity says, hold up, who is behind this entity? So basically this know your business, know your customer thing, it's a way of combating money laundering. That's the bottom line. So now if they find out that, okay, this is Harrison that has embezzled XYZ amount from her state, you put a halt on that business. Hold on, let's understand what's going on here. Then now you talk about your source of funds. It's possible I just paid in $100 million into my account, and I want to deal with you. You will request for my statement of account. Let's understand your inflow and outflow of funds. Let's be very sure you're not coming to do business with us with laundered or with monies or funds you are trying to launder. That's the intention. It's not like we want to stop business for you. No. We want to know who is behind this company. Because there are a lot of shell companies around, companies that are just, that are more like cover-ups for money launderers. That's the intention of the law.
So,
Okay, if you don't mind, let me also add to what she said.
okay.
I think it's easier to, like when the Binance guy was here, he said, if you're an individual, you can easily open an account, but if it's a company, it's a little bit hard. The reason is she's talking as a compliance officer, so let me talk as a law officer, right? A company has a separate legal personality. When law, you say that's a separate legal personality. Both of us can just register an entity and trade in the name of the entity. If that entity is caught, like, has laundered money, we're not responsible. Munachi and Lasbury are not responsible, right? Because it's the entity, because that's a separate legal personality, right? So the essence of KYB is to know who are those behind the legal personality. So now you're going beyond that legal personality to lift the veil. Lifting the veil means you want to know the people behind that entity, because if the entity is a shell company, then the owners of that shell company should be responsible. And you can only get them to be responsible for that fraud if you're able to lift the veil, right? So that's why when you want to do business with a business name or a company, they will tell you, okay, get the list of directors, who are the shareholders, who is the company secretary. Some will even ask you who is their auditor, and bring your financial statement and things like that, because they want to make sure that they understand the people that are floating that entity. And if there is a problem and the legal entity goes into extinction, you can always fall back on the directors and shareholders of the company. So it's very important to provide those documents.
Let me ask a very frank question. Do you think compliance works? Let me tell you why I asked that question. There's still, most of the banks, first of all, do the heaviest compliance. But most of the money laundering is still going through banks. So is compliance working, or is just an additional cost to a business? But is it really solving the problem that is set out to solve? Or, because at the end of the day, this crime is still happening and law enforcement is still picking people up and people are still going to prison after the fact. That means after the transaction happened. And an entity can be clean today and dirty tomorrow. So does compliance work? And justify it for me.
Okay, yes. I would say compliance works, right? So let's take, let's see the first step, KYC, transaction monitoring, right? So if you pass that KYC hurdle, the second hurdle you need to pass is the transaction monitoring, right? So the essence of transaction monitoring is to catch the transaction, like the fraud, catch the fraud while it's happening, right? So if you don't have the right processes in place to catch that fraud while it's happening, then you fall back on the KYC.
But these fraudsters are not idiots. They know what they are doing.
Exactly, they are not idiots. They know why they are doing that, and that's why it's difficult to monitor a transaction. Yeah. So you only get to know about the fraud when it has happened, yes, right? So when it has happened and you go to maybe EFCC invites you and all that, you have failed on that note, monitoring the transaction. What EFCC will ask you is, who is this person? Then that takes you to KYC. So that's why KYC is very important, even if you fail trying to monitor the transaction. Okay, if you need to get off the hook as an entity, you need to ensure that you'll be able to supply those KYC or KYB documentation to the law enforcement agency. If not, you'll be responsible.
Now, a very good question. Are companies supposed to be law enforcement agents? Like, we see a lot of companies holding people's funds or doing some things. And are we supposed to do that? And to what limits can we do it?
Okay, holding people's funds. Talking about holding people's funds, if we're a law enforcement agency, once you suspect a transaction, that's suspicious transaction, what the law requires of you is to report that suspicious transaction. And while you're trying to report that suspicious transaction, you're meant to hold the status quo. That's a legal term, right? What it means is you're not meant to conduct any further transaction on that transaction. So you're not holding on to people's funds. Rather, you have stopped any transaction. You have stopped, you don't need to continue that transaction anymore until you get a further direction from the law enforcement agency. So is that putting an end to that transaction that you may term as you're holding people's funds? You're not holding people's funds. Rather, you have put a stop to that transaction pending the directive you get from the law enforcement agency. So what the law requires of you is once you suspect a transaction, you report it, and the law enforcement agency will give you a further direction. They can direct you, they can tell you, okay, we want to conduct investigation. At the end of the investigation, they'll tell you this transaction is clean. Don't forget, you're not saying this transaction is fraudulent. What you're saying is that I suspect it may be fraudulent. So is it left for you internally to investigate, to convince yourself that this transaction may be fraudulent? Then if you have convinced yourself internally, you then report, then the law enforcement agency will do the proper investigation to know whether you're right or you're wrong. So what's the end of their investigation, they will then give a direction to you, either to release those funds or to probably, if they found the person liable, they will tell you to transfer the funds to the legitimate owner or maybe hold it if they need to take the person to court and all that. So you're not holding people's funds, rather you're just putting a stop to that transaction pending further direction from the law enforcement agency.
Okay, so just to wrap up, what does every company that will deal with OneLiquidity, what they need to know about our AML and KYC processes? What do you think they should know, and how do you think, how are we upright with all these policies?
That's for OneLiquidity, right?
Not for you, don't worry. You guys already have your shit together.
Now, for businesses that intend to transact with OneLiquidity, we take our KYC and KYB very seriously. I had previously mentioned the documents we'll be requiring from them. So just get them ready, get them handy. They're not so much basic business requirements, because we will not, Munachi is laughing, we will not do business with you if you do not have your KYB documents.
A round of applause, please. A round of applause. Thank you
very
so
much.
So does anyone have any questions? Any questions?
Do you have any questions?
All right, so we are going to move. Oh, you do? All right.
Hi. I think I want to tap in where Mona was asking two questions. He asked the first, all the documents, like she said, if you don't get all the things hard, they will not do business. He said, what are you guys doing with it? And does compliance work? Because I think there is a gap, right? So it's very easy. Me, the way I think about compliance, I think about it as a way company dodges who bears the end of the law, you know. Yes. So if people really want to do compliance, both of us know that bad actors don't really come on platform. They find people that come on platform, you understand? So they conduct mostly personal businesses. And in Nigeria, like this is said, it's about a cultural thing. In Nigeria, because people are really looking for businesses to survive. And then someone comes to you, oh, we want to do business. And you say, oh, bring your documents. The person will just move on. So I'm talking about not the platforms. I'm talking about the other guys that deal on the platform, right? So now they do business with the person just to make sure that they survive. So they come on the platform and then they do business. The platform has their KYC and everything. And then the business come choke. Like, it chokes them. So see, I see two ways. First of all, it's that the platform has to answer to the law enforcement and the government and everything. Also, the platform has to protect the customer in some way, one way or the other. Like, it's been really tricky because for example, all the arrests that has been made, we are not basically, the law enforcement are not basically arresting the bad actors. They're arresting people that do business with the bad actors, which are people that went one way, one place or the other to deposit their KYC. So immediately you do that, you have, So how does this help? Like, for example, you want to be able to promise your customers that, first of all, you are compliant, right? They know it is on terms of use, and then, but also that you are protecting their interests. Like, there's a very big conflict because this thing happened with Binance, like we mentioned, and then people kept on saying because people were going to law enforcement and losing money for what they don't know. Sometimes the law enforcement agencies can't even prove where the crime happened and all those things. So, like, how do we preach compliance,
And
when these things happen?
This is a very good question because I'm going to tell you guys this thing and it's going to be very, very funny. I had my account closed some time ago. And the good thing is, because of the way I followed up the platform, okay, it was FTX. We have our FTX account closed sometime. And they sent this whole law enforcement stuff and we read it. Then we followed up with the law enforcement officers. So the first thing they did right, first of all, they didn't tell us. They didn't tell us why they closed the account. Then I sued them. Then they told us, they sent us the issue, the problem. They sent us the case officer. We followed up with the case officer, paid for a lawyer in the US, followed up, had a court reading, only to discover that it was a mistake. What saved me was that I got my money out before FTX collapsed. That's why I'm living. That's why I'm having this OneLiquidity today. If not, I'll be somewhere. Probably. I don't know where I'll be. But the thing is, sometimes we get in, and this is the problem. Law enforcement, sometimes they make mistakes. One. Two, as a platform, you're supposed to protect. Who are you protecting? The law enforcement, whose interest should be on top? Your customer's interest or the law enforcement interest? Do you understand? Even though it's a mix, it's a constant battle, but how do we optimize for processes and ensure that our customers are also protected? And I think this is the issue that Binance has, and now if Binance has an issue with you, the way they manage it, I think they have built out a robust system. So how do we as businesses, as OneLiquidity, as Yellow Card, how are we managing these processes to ensure that, one, our customers are protected, and two, that we are also compliant with what these people are? Because it's a bit of a constant battle.
Okay, so let me take the first part before I pass it on to her. First, you said, whose interests are we protecting, our users or the law enforcement agency, right? So my answer is, we're not protecting any interest of the law enforcement agency. We're protecting the interest of the general public. Whoever that will come into the system, whoever that is in the system, and whoever that has left the system, right? So not just the users, but whoever will come in later on, whoever that has left and all that. So why you're doing this is because you're regulated. Let me say in some environments where you're regulated, right? Or where you're not regulated, you still have that responsibility. Like there is, if you look at the maybe EFCC Act, there is a particular section that talks about you not tipping off the suspect, right? Like when you said you were not aware, they didn't tell you what happened and all that, telling you would have been termed as tipping off. So they will first of all...
They have closed the account already. What do you mean?
Yes, they have closed the account. No, they have closed the account, but there was still an investigation ongoing, probably, okay. Right? Yeah. So it is after the investigation process, I don't know how long it takes, that probably they will write you and say you're liable for this has happened and all that.
Sorry to ask you, but now you are investigating someone. You are investigating someone. Remember, keyword investigation.
Yes.
And you close his account.
Yes.
And you don't tell him why you closed his account.
Yes.
Even, I don't think it's possible to close someone's account without a court order, right? In Nigeria.
No. when you look at, okay, let me start with the user agreement.
Okay.
So every company, sorry, I'm a lawyer.
Bureaucracy.
Yes, yes. Let me start with the user agreement. Every company, every fintech company has a user agreement, right? So one clause that is consistent in those user agreements is for the user to accept that we can actually ban you or put a stop to your transactions if there is a suspicious transaction and we're investigating. So you may term it as they've closed my account. But what we have actually done is to put a stop. We don't want you to move out those funds in case they're actually fraudulent transactions.
But the question is, are you not obligated to tell the customer, okay, I don't know what the case is, but this is the case officer. This is the EFCC.
Yes.
Are you not supposed to do that?
No, what you're meant to do, probably to say, oh, we have put a ban on this, we're investigating a transaction.
Mm-hmm.
Very simple, without giving any
Yeah,
reason.
but what time frame? Is there, I'm sorry I'm putting you on this, but what
Yeah.
time frame? Because it's a problem, it's a conundrum that we also face.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know, and Jerome asked that question because I'm sure he also faces that problem. So law enforcement stuff comes, he needs to close the account. Now the problem is he's now sitting ducks. His customers is bombarding him. Why is my account closed? Law enforcement say, don't tell them why his account is closed. So now he is likely to get sued for reasons that he doesn't really understand. And if he doesn't have a time frame to work with,
Yeah.
he can't share the information of why the investigation, he probably doesn't even know. Do you understand? And there's no, shouldn't be a way for him to say, okay, look, your money was frozen by this police, please contact them and follow up. That's what they do in Nigeria nowadays anyways. But.
Okay, so in terms of time frame is a company-specific process, right? Yellow Card can say within 48 hours we'll conduct our internal investigation. But when we have reported the case to a law enforcement agency, we can't predict how long it will take them to do the investigation. And both of us are in Nigeria, it can take forever, right? So even if you're being sued, you have a proper defense. The right defense is, oh, we reported a suspicious transaction, it's been investigated. No court will rule against you as long as you said we have reported it's been investigated. The timeline is actually out of your control. You can only control the timeline within your system. So some people say within 24 hours, within 48 hours, if you find nothing on you, we are going to unban the account. But if we do, we report and the timeline is totally out of our control. So you can set the timeline internally within OneLiquidity. We can set within Yellow Card. Ours might be 48 hours. Yours might be 72 or 24 hours.
The final question was around where you don't know what, let's say it came from a law enforcement agency. Are you not supposed to tell your customer, go and contact this law enforcement agency and find out what the problem is?
No.
You're not supposed to do that. So you're supposed to just collect the beating.
No, yes. All you need to do is to say, oh, sorry, we suspected a fraudulent transaction and this account is under investigation. Right? You're not meant to give details because if you do, it will be like tipping off.
Wow, that's a very difficult place to be, but... So I think she takes the second question. Okay. I think you have answered both already. All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much.